All right, back is Larry to continue the series that, we'll probably get near probably 30 episodes, but I think the game plan is to tie it up by late May. Does that sound right with you, Larry? And good to hear from you again.
That sounds good.
Okay. And by the way, you had a pass on one weekend for what I guess is becoming a more and more popular festival out in Austin called, was it South by Southwest?
Yes, sir. Yeah. A friend of mine he has an event every year. It's like a folk thing. He used to have a record label in Europe, and he's been involved with the music scene here in Austin for many years. And so he brought in some people. There was a band from Great Britain and several bands from areas around the country here. And it's pretty good stuff. I mean, I didn't want to go listen to anything. It was loud, head-banging stuff, but this was pretty nice, mellow folk music type stuff.
Well, two things. One, on that day that it was happening, and of course I had known you were going there.
Yeah.
I don't know what channel did it, but they did it on Network News. So it was one of the big three, I guess. Mm-hmm. And they did a nice job on it. I mean, it looked like I guess it's expanded a little bit to play to almost everybody's musical tastes. And it goes outside a little bit, I guess, of what you guys would like as far as,
right.
Folk country, Mex-Tex, whatever, Southern swing. But they did a nice job. And I was looking in the crowd, for some jerk with a Texas hat on. But there was so many of them.
Wow.
And stop laughing.
Okay.
Stop laughing. You ruined the whole show like that.
That's not nice. Oh, well.
No, but I was saying, wouldn't that be a hoot? But, I mean, you didn't see any camera. Well, maybe you did. I don't know. You see any camera crews or you guys were...
I don't think they really had any camera crews there.
Well, yes, they did.
There were a lot of people, taking photographs and, their own little videos and stuff. But it's pretty much a relatively kind of low-key event. That's why, like I said, it's held at Threadgill's, which is a restaurant here in Austin. Kenneth Threadgill, who's passed away now, was a great old guy. Anyway, he used to have a restaurant down on Lamar here in Austin, and that's where several music stars, had played there. And actually, he kind of was a mentor for Janis Joplin. And whenever she was here in Austin, she attended the University of Texas, and she kind of got her start in music and kind of gave up on school, and, the rest was history. But my friend has a small interest, in the business there. They're the second one, which is downtown, and Threadgill's there. So they have a little beer garden, a little outdoor area there, set up with chairs and bleachers and everything, and they have a stage, and they just bring everybody out. It was a nice day, and we all had a pretty good time.
Did you drink German beer?
Yeah, well, I really wasn't drinking beer outside. I drank a couple inside. I don't really like to drink beer in the sun. It has a tendency to kind of make you feel a little dehydrated. So. Oh,
that's another word for it. This is an aside. It doesn't necessarily tie in to what we're talking about, but it does tie in a certain extent with the German influence, which we are not equating with Nazism. It isn't like if you're one or the other, right? However, what I do find interesting, and this involves Florida as well, there are a number of prominent German families in west central Florida. Mm-hmm. They populate the towns of San Antonio, St. Joe, St. Leo, and there might be one other, but come to find out, tracing them back, because I had to do a story for the paper on this whole thing, there was a German enclave that set up in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Now, when I think of Minnesota and Wisconsin, I'm thinking pretty much, Scandinavian Protestants. Mm-hmm. But there was also a very prominent German presence there, and also Catholic, because we got to remember that the French Catholic priests that came out of Quebec went into Michigan and Illinois and Wisconsin and Minnesota, dating back to the years of like LaSalle, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, the enclave from Minnesota had two kind of like, what do you want to call them, forks. One went to Texas, and the other one came here. I just think that's interesting because there's a German influence, even if you read Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove.
Oh, there's a huge German influence in Central Texas.
You know,
in fact, they used to have campaigns where they would go to Germany and try to get settlers to come over because they were trying to, they were selling land, and they were trying to, more or less populate Central Texas, and so that all happened just prior to the Civil War. And
right.
There are several towns here in Central Texas that have German names. There's a small town called Weimar near me, a few miles south of here, south of Austin. There's another bigger town, very beautiful little place called New Braunfels, which is almost, at one time was almost exclusively German. There were a lot of German farmers and ranchers in the Central Texas area. That's something that people don't.
Well, the one I crack up about,
Texas.
There's one town whose children had the longest bus ride in the world to school. And if you think back down to the Big Bend area, Alpine.
Yeah.
Alpine. Yeah. The kids got to ride like 100 miles to go to school. I'm like, are you serious?
Yeah, it's got to be a little bit tough.
And one other thing that's interesting also, and this goes back perhaps to whatever came out of some kind of alliance, not that strong perhaps, but we go back to the German-Mexican thing. Mm-hmm. And actually that underlies the whole Zimmerman note, if you recall that.
Yeah.
With Germany saying, look, if you pitch in on our side in World War I, we'll help you out. But also, that was evident in something that I thought was a real anomaly when I first encountered it. And it was embodied by Linda Ronstadt having a lineage that was Mexican-German. Mm-hmm. I mean, Ronstadt. But she looks...
Oh, yeah, she definitely has a German last name.
But I mean, the combination, it just doesn't, you know what I mean? It doesn't, how did that happen? But, again, she lived in Arizona.
Well, her dad saw her mother and...
Nice call. But, by the way, you ever see Ronstadt's high school picture?
What's that?
Ronstadt's high school picture?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen it?
No.
No, I know you haven't. Ooh. Let's just say that was the moth stage. Or the caterpillar stage. She was on a butterfly.
I remember doing the early days when she was with the Stone Ponies, if you remember that.
That was of course, 66. That was the first big hit.
She was hot, man. She was just a really hot chick. But,
stop. All right, stop right there.
That's just me.
No, when she wore the Cub Scout uniform.
The fire hose.
She wore the Cub Scout uniform. You remember that?
What's that?
She wore the Cub Scout uniform on one album. It was like, oh, please, Linda, don't do that. Not in wearing Catholic school.
That's a little bit strange, but yeah.
Anyway, that whole German influence, and the other thing I thought strange was that German Catholics, because I always equate them with being Protestant, but that is not necessarily the case. That there was a huge, in fact, let's put it this way: Germany was Catholic before Luther came around.
Oh yeah,
sure.
Germany was, I guess that probably the percentages were like maybe 55-60% Protestant, and 45% Catholic. I mean, there's a very large Catholic population in Germany.
Are you a part German at all?
No.
Okay, you're British, right?
Most of my ancestry is English and Irish. Almost all of it.
That's why Liam writes to you all the time.
Yeah, I like Liam. I like the Irish, And I told him one time, that every St. Patrick's Day, I get drunk and fight with myself.
That's right. Well, whereas Tom Waits used to say, I gets myself drunk and then I takes myself up and takes advantage of myself. All right. Enough of small talk.
Yeah.
All right. When we last left Larry, where do you want to pick up? Or I think you had said, and I said it would be a good teaser for this show, and that is assassinations. Yes.
Basically, I wanted to talk about assassination and how the assassinations in the 1960s and since, which happened in America, are really related to and date back to the time of the Weimar Republic. And so that's really where I want to get started. Now, I'm going to use one author here that I know you're not fond of, but is John Judge. But at one time, John Judge, way back when he wrote this, when he gave this speech, was in the early 80s.
He's a good JFK researcher.
Yeah, he was. He really was.
I know.
And that's what this talk was about. It's titled Assassination as a Tool of Fascism. And I'll get started here. And this is John Judge. Now, if you go back to the period at the end of the Weimar Republic in the late 20s and early 30s, before Hitler rose to power, you'll find a pattern of political assassinations. It's depicted, interestingly, in Ingmar Bergman's probably least distributed film, The Serpent's Egg. And the people that begin to die are the labor leaders, the political activists, the musicians, the people who might have an effective public voice and might stand against the fascism begin to die in large numbers. They couldn't, he was talking about the police here, and the German police admitted that these were political assassinations. But they said they couldn't solve them. They couldn't make the historical link to what was happening. Or they could, but they were paid not to, like many of the investigations that we now have in this country. They couldn't solve those murders. They couldn't hook them up to the most obvious suspects, which were the members of the Freikorps from World War I, the trained and paid assassins from that period who were helping to pave the way for Hitler and for the end of the political opposition there. The idea of political assassinations and their origins really go back to 1918. Not that no one was killed earlier. I certainly don't suggest that. But in terms of what we're dealing with in the current period, most of this is a reaction to that revolution, to that change of power there in Russia and in some of the other countries in that period of time in the early 1900s. And in response to that were monarchists. There were industrialists. There were people that owned a tremendous amount of wealth, both here in the United States and in the industrialized countries in Europe, who had a vested interest in reversing that. And they had societies. They had groups that they formed. One of them was the Solidarists, made up of a link between the emerging fascists and the neo-Nazis. Another core of reactionaries existed within the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church. Opus Dei, the work of God, was newly emerging on that scale. And then there another group that has been known as the Knights Hospitallers, that were the military arm of the church during the Crusades, who became the Knights of Malta. And these were lay aristocracies within the church, people that still believed that there shouldn't have been a counter-reformation, that thought that the Inquisition should have been continued, people that used flagellation and hair shirts for prayer, people sort of like the Christian right. Elements of the state and elements of the rich and the monarchies that still existed formed a bond of interest. And in large part, one of the motivating people who went around and collected their monies and their energies in order to reverse the revolutionary change in Russia was Herbert Hoover, who spent actually more time in Europe than he did in the United States. He was also later responsible for the formation of ideas that led to the National Security Council and the National Security State. And part of what happened was that the Romanov treasury, which was stolen and secreted out of the country, was then turned around, along with money collected by Hoover and these monarchists and others, to finance the rearmament of Germany secretly from 1918 to 1932. And it's that rearmament that then gave them the impetus to set up a drive to essentially get back the Soviet Union. And only because that drive was defeated at tremendous human cost, about 20 million lives in Russia and those countries. Some of the worst killing went on there, and the civilians also, but tremendous cost. They were militarily stopped in 1943. There were divisions within the class as to how much money would have to be expended on the fascists. There were others there who supported them, but it was time to regroup. It was time to back off a little, to try to get what they had together. The resources were more or less expended in the effort to set up a permanent war economy, which Charles Wilson from General Electric talked about, and to go into what they called the Cold War, a low-intensity warfare and genocide against Third World people, while they continued to build the empire and maintain the hegemony, and to reestablish the Fourth Reich, the fascism, not only here in the United States, but throughout the world. And part of that involved moving these Nazis all over the world. Many of those scientists, many of the munitions and aerospace experts, many of the spies, about 300 of them, in fact, under General Reinhard Gehlen, who had headed up Hitler's intelligence network for the East and the Soviet Union, were brought from 1943 up until even more recently in the present day into the United States and into other countries around the world, South Africa included. But the fascism was an indigenous problem in many, many countries. It didn't just exist in Nazi Germany. There were groups of fascists that the Nazis were able to use in many countries as collaborationist governments. assassination was always a tool for them, not only the mass death, but the individual death of the people that can make a difference, of the politicians that might make a change, of the people that stood in the way. And they perfected these techniques, and those techniques were brought here and used in the United States, so that when Mae Brussell did her work with the Warren Commission, and I spent several years reading the volumes and going into depth, and I went through about 300 cubic feet of material in the archives, we found those people in the commission records in key places, and I'll just talk to you about a few of them so you can get a sense of those people that I'm talking about, how they would play in. I'm not going to go into that part of it right now, but what Judge is saying is absolutely true, that the idea of assassination of your enemies as a political tool was definitely developed strongly in the time of the development of the Third Reich in Weimar Germany just before Hitler took power. I have a couple of things I'd like to read here, a couple of different articles and excerpts from them. One is from a book called 1,000-Year Conspiracy, Secret Germany Behind the Mask. This is by Paul Winkler, and it was written during World War II. It's a very good book. What he talks about here is an organization that dates back into antiquity in Germany. The defeat of 1918 wrought considerable changes in the political organization of Germany, the monarchic system having borne the entire blame for the debacle. The German people now carried through their democratic revolt. The Hohenzollerns were banished and the republic was set up. The Prusso-Teutonic caste composed of the Junkers. Junkers were the big landowners in Prussia. Officers and officials had been well served by the Hohenzollerns. A few individual members of the Prusso-Teutonic caste continued sentimental relations with Wilhelm II. For the group as a whole, however, the emperor no longer existed, since to disciples of the cruel Teutonic philosophy, any defeat is tantamount to suicide. Sacrifice of the Hohenzollerns seemed to appease the wrath of the world, so that the Prusso-Teutonic clique was able to reorganize its forces quietly and prepare to resume control of the affairs of Germany. It was concerned first of all with terrorizing those unfortunates who had after the defeat of 1918, the unhappy idea of introducing a democratic regime and spirit into Germany. It was also necessary to eliminate the leaders of the democratic parties. Could the rightist parties, many of whose members were faithful servants of the Prusso-Teutonic forces, no longer be useful in the Reichstag as in Bismarck's time? Granted, but what difference would this make? The Prusso-Teutonics did not intend to bother with the Reichstag. They would use methods completely opposite to those of Parliament. Moreover, methods of this type would be closer to the traditions of the Prusso-Teutonic group than would any parliamentary procedure. Bismarck himself had accepted the parliamentary system only after much hesitation and with a certain amount of resignation. He had found it a difficult task to get this system accepted by his younger friends. These new methods, which were at the same time very old, called for terror through assassination. The Prusso-Teutonic forces, never acting openly, had the ingenious idea of reviving and making use of a Germanic institution of the Middle Ages, the Fema. The Phalanx was a sort of secret society which set itself up as a tribunal in all matters. Its members were at the same time judges and executor of decisions. In the 3.5 years following the armistice from 1919 to June 24, 1922, the date of Rathenau's murder, some 354 political assassinations were perpetrated in Germany by the various national revival organizations. For only 2 of these crimes, the assassinations of Rathenau and Eisner, was any punishment meted out, and this was extremely light, despite the fact that the various state police forces were officially Republican organizations. Usually, they allowed the assassins to escape. In those cases, however, where the killers were actually arrested by overzealous officials, they were acquitted, or at best fined or condemned to imprisonment for a ridiculously small period on some silly ground, for example, the carrying of guns without a permit. Count Arco, who had assassinated Eisner, leader of the Bavarian left, was sentenced to death in January 1920, but his sentence was commuted to imprisonment for life. This actually consisted of his doing some vague farm work near the prison. Finally, on April 13, 1924, his sentence was suspended and he was set free. Shortly thereafter, he was appointed director of the Süddeutsche Lufthansa, which I think means Southern Aircraft, a major aviation concern controlled by the Reich. These assassinations occurred with a regularity that baffled the general public, and yet they seemed to be part of an organized plan. Soon people began to speak of the FEMA in connection with these crimes, comparing the assassinations with the executions of the notoriously secret German tribunal of past centuries, which the recent crimes resembled in many respects. The history of the FEMA tribunals was independent of that of the Teutonic Knights. The order had always claimed that it did not have to submit to the jurisdiction of the terrible FEMA. But actually, the frightful practices of the FEMA had widely penetrated among the order's circles. Kotzebue related in speaking of the Grand Master Wenrich von Niprode that in his time, many Kampfthurs who were regional commanders of the order were members of the FEMA, and the Grand Master himself was suspected of being one of its leaders. One morning, 2 knights who were beyond reproach were found hanging from an oak tree outside Marienburg, marked by the FEMA, said Kotzebue. The Grand Master was asked to prosecute the murderers. He did nothing. The others, enraged, again requested action from him, and now he declared in dead earnest one should abstain from passing judgment on such things. When following the armistice of 1918, the Prussian Junker organizations decided to revive these bloody practices, they were well aware of the traditional streams that might be tapped in the interest of their cause. They used methods which evoked familiar memories throughout Germany. What were these notorious traditions of the FEMA? They were founded on the old German law, giving all manorial lords the right to judge freely over their serfs. This practice was maintained particularly in Westphalia. In a later undetermined period, it gave rise to the secret tribunal of the Holy FEMA, a tribunal which meted out but a single kind of punishment, the death sentence. The feline originated from pre-Christian pagan moral conception, despite the fact that it claimed to be Christian. This institution served no more of a religious purpose than did the Teutonic Order, despite the religious facade which both organizations had found useful at their inception. At the time of their foundation, all institutions had to be Christian. The FEMA represented a revolt of Teutonic law against prevailing Roman law, which latter was the basic code of the official German tribunals. The existence of the FEMA was known, but its operations were secret. The FEMA soon became simply a means of terror against all individuals who might be in personal conflict with members of this powerful secret organization. The Christian appearance it assumed was but a cloak, and moreover, in no other Christian country was there a similar organization. The FEMA was a purely German conception, and the morality underlying its judgments was a Teutonic morality in direct contradiction to the principles and customs of Christianity. Fundamentally, therefore, we witnessed the clash of two opposing civilizations, and it was our fond illusion that one of these ceased to exist in the far distant past. This error comes from the fact that since the period of the Christianization of Germany, the civilization of the barbaric ages has been hidden beneath a Christian cloak and has survived there. In this manner, it has succeeded in preserving its institutions for ends clearly opposed to those of Christianity. In any case, it is curious to note this fact that concerning the alliance between the Junkers and the heads of Westphalian heavy industry, these two groups are present-day descendants of men who participated in the two German institutions whose traditions most directly oppose Western civilization, the Teutonic Order and the FEMA. The renewal of the FEMA seemed to rest with the Junkers, whose secret self-defense societies stemmed in direct line from the ancient society of lizards and indirectly from the Teutonic Order. These societies were in a position to make an immediate decision to revive the FEMA terror, which was indispensable to their aims, and then to organize it at once. Such a reign of terror would never have spread spontaneously, nor could it have been resulted from the decision of a few members of the same caste on the spur of the moment. The principal aim was to execute, one by one, the leaders of the young German Republic. Almost overnight, the numerous sub-organizations functioning under various names became executors of the restored FEMA. Through their good offices, hundreds of democratic leaders were put to death in post-war Germany. In the democratic nations outside of Germany, no attention was paid to these murders because they considered it a German internal affair. This barbaric institution had terrorized Germany for centuries. One can imagine what services it could render to an unscrupulous group pursuing its own purposes, and it was inevitable that such an institution should become the instrument for all sorts of private interest. When the FEMA returned to Germany following the 1918 armistice, its reappearance was due to the initiative of two groups of interest, the Junkers and the leaders of heavy industry in Westphalia. In any event, every clue to the crimes of the revived FEMA uncovered by German tribunals or contemporary newspapers and their exposures led directly either to the Junkers or to heavy industry. Financing of the organizations responsible for the FEMA crimes came from one or the other of these groups. A number of such crimes were committed on the various states of the Junkers, where numerous FEMA units were in hiding and available for FEMA activities. Moreover, the Prusso-Teutonic Junkers and officers seem to have been very directly involved in these crimes to have been the immediate instigator. The role of the leaders of heavy industry was probably to finance such projects. That was kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
I also have a very good article by history professor Brian E. Krim, who's an assistant professor of history at Caldwell College. The title of the article is "Terror from the Right: Revolutionary Terrorism."
Larry,
I'm
sorry. Let me get this straight. What college is he associated with?
Caldwell, Caldwell.
Yeah, it's in Jersey.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Huh. How long ago was that piece written?
2007.
All right. Thank you. No, I mean, I found it interesting. You know, having spent time in that system.
Very well written. Guy, apparently very good professor. He starts off with an introduction, and he has several comments, and he has some quotes from different people. But I think introduction is a good summary. Their First World War damaged the European psyche and physically and mentally maimed a whole generation of European men fortunate enough to survive the maelstrom. Nowhere was this more apparent than in post-war in Weimar Germany. For some young German veterans, the war never ended. They simply brought it home to continue to fight in the chaotic streets of the new republic. They reveled in the experience of violence, which they directed against their enemies, real and imagined. Between 1919 and 1923, dozens of loosely organized groups embarked on a campaign of revolutionary terrorism designed to spark a civil war and unite the disparate elements of the German right behind the goal of creating an authoritarian state. After the failure of the Hitler Putsch in November 1923, the extreme right altered its tactics and developed sophisticated political organizations capable of competing for influence in the government it once worked to destroy. While the Weimar Republic weathered multiple attempts to bring it down through violence, it was overcome by a combination of internal events and the misguided attempt by the mainstream conservatives to co-opt the Nazis. Assassinations and other terrorist acts alone did not destroy the Weimar Republic, but those responsible for such acts conducted a protracted, multifaceted effort to undermine its legitimacy. The extreme right's early campaign of violence destabilized the Weimar government and both intimidated and enthralled the German people. The Nazis deployed revolutionary terrorism in their political struggle and delivered the death blow to the Weimar Republic. Here he has a quote from a man named Friedrich Wilhelm Heinz, who was a veteran of World War I, and he says, quote, "People told us that the war was over. That made us laugh. We ourselves are the war. Its flame burns strongly in us. It envelops our whole being and fascinates us with the enticing urge to destroy. We obeyed and marched on to the battlefields of the post-war world just as we had gone into battle on the Western Front, singing, reckless, and filled with the joy of adventure as we marched to the attack, silent, deadly, remorseless in battle." What a nice guy. Anyway.
Well, how old would he have been at that time? Do you know?
Heinz? Yeah, he'd been I'm sure in his early 20s.
Well, I mean, you've been there. We've been there. You think you're bulletproof.
Yeah.
And if you think you got some cause, or even if you're the opposite, and that is you have no cause and you're a nihilist, it's like, well, who cares? You know?
Not only that, but I mean, you've been involved in killing and seeing so much killing going on around you. You know, the death is your constant companion. And, you know, your job as a soldier is to kill, and this guy, I'm sure, had killed. After a while, I think that would have a tendency to sear your conscience.
You're right, and that's why...
put you in a position where you just didn't give a hoot, you know?
Well,
and, hey, you know...
but you raise a good...
right. We think we got stabbed in the back by the communists and the Jews, and we're going to go out there and show the world that, you know, we can take Germany back. That was kind of the attitude that was going on, and that's what developed.
Well, I mean, you raised within me the thought that there's that statement about people who go to war. You'll hear this a lot associated with World War II. Mm-hmm. And I think it's even, maybe Steinbeck even spoke about this to a certain extent through his character, Hawley, in The Winter of Our Discontent.
Right.
So like a third go to war, a third, are in the service. They don't shoot to kill. A second shoot to kill because they have to. And the other third shoot to kill because they like it.
Yeah.
My point is that those who I would think that stay on in the service could probably be, what would you say, somewhat mainstream psychopaths.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said,
well, there are different reactions.
Right.
Professor Krim here talks about that. I'll read this just very briefly.
Okay.
Competing with the sentimental pacifism of Erich Maria Remarque and his All Quiet on the Western Front were a flood of memoirs and war fiction from veterans who gloried in the experience of total war and found it something liberating. Ernst Junger, a right-wing luminary and hardened veteran, declared the triumph of the new men, the running, battle-tested men who are ruthless to themselves and others. Junger continued, "This war is not the end, but the prelude to violence. It is the forge in which the new world will be hammered into new borders and communities. New forms want to be filled with blood, and power will be wielded with a hard fist. The war is a great school, and the new man will bear our stamp. The festival is about to begin, and we are its princes." Well, the way he talks there, this guy's got to be a Nazi. I mean, or on his way to becoming a Nazi. Mm-hmm. Might not even been the term Nazi at that point, but he's talking about the new man and the new world being formed with blood. And like you were talking about, different people have different reactions. Erich Maria Remarque, who wrote All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a great book, actually was a World War I veteran who based the novel on his experiences, and to him it was the most horrible experience that anyone could possibly have. And he was totally anti-war and totally a pacifist. So, I mean, you've got two different, attitudes there.
Have you stopped at a point where I can ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
I just want to go back to you mentioning Hoover.
Mm-hmm.
Hoover seems to get a pass as being somewhat important to a degree in the first, let's say, quarter century of the 20th century.
Right.
They look at him as being somewhat of an absolute incompetent president. If you believe history as it's told to us, probably. But I don't think he was. I think he did exactly what he was supposed to not. I mean, he didn't do what he was supposed to not do.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That would set up FDR to do the things that, of course, were not of his own bidding, but he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Hoover presides over the trashing of the economy. What else was there? Yeah, Coolidge was before Hoover. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think during the time of Coolidge, they did most of the damage that they wanted to do, just like they did with, you remember when Phil Gramm, the senator from Texas, back quite a few years ago, was running around trying to deregulate everything for Wall Street and set up the crash of 2007, 2008. Well, during the time of Coolidge, the Republicans were deregulating, the banking system, deregulating Wall Street, so that they could come in and have, the crash of 1929.
Well, good point, because I've just gone to POTUS, Presidents of the United States, POTUS, .com, and of course you can't read into this if you're just looking at dates and such, but just as you said, Hoover gets, Coolidge is out of there by March 3rd, 1929, so he doesn't preside over the stock market crash.
Right.
But just as you said, and I mean, we got to be honest about this, okay? I mean, you don't care about Republicans and Democrats and presidents.
I really don't. I mean,
no.
I don't think there really is anything. I mean, there is no longer a real, if there ever was, there is no longer a real political party. There's only one party now. It's got a left and right wing, and it's the corporate party, which is like a giant vulture feeding on the taxpayers of America. I mean, it's Tweedledee and Tweedledummer. Neither party represents the common ordinary man, but they keep presenting us with the illusion of a choice, and that's really what it's all about. The powers that be, the New World Order, if you would, are sitting there, presenting the American public with an illusion, and it's pumped up especially by television and the media in general, but especially television. You've got two channels that are totally dedicated to one or the other of the political parties. I'm talking about Fox is the house organ of the Republican Party, and then you've got MSNBC, which is the house organ of the Democratic Party. And and anytime you turn them on, it's like 24/7 the Democrats suck or the Republicans suck,
Well,
and they keep pounding the American public with this crap. And really, when it all gets down to it, they work together.
Yes.
For their own betterment, and everybody else is basically out of luck.
The reason I bring it up is because, as you just said, I mean, we look at Coolidge. I'm just looking at his dates, and in his cabinet was the Secretary of Secretary of Commerce was Hoover. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing that just made me want to puke. Back in when was it? I guess it was 2008. I mean, Obama gets in, the bubble bursts, and of course Rush and the rest of the right wing talking heads, all of a sudden pound on Obama. And I'm sitting in the car listening to this, and I'm saying to myself, there's got to be some reasonable folks out there who vote with the R on their card, who are saying, Rush, whoa. I mean, come on. He wasn't there for this whole thing to get all that momentum
right.
and become a runaway train.
I think there is still such a thing as a decent conservative, real conservative. But the principles that real conservatives used to live by and believe in are being diluted so much, and there's really nobody in the Republican Party who represents that viewpoint anymore.
I would say that's also orchestrated.
Yeah.
Because, Barry O.
Now it's all this really what I have to call fascist-style rhetoric coming out of that jackass Rush Limbaugh and people like him and the candidates. And I mean, we've already went into who's really backing Ron Paul. I mean, Ron Paul is the candidate of the far right, only he's disguised as a libertarian. And libertarianism is often a mask for fascism. I mean, he's talking all this trash about fascism is coming to America and all that. Yeah, you're right, it is, Ron. And you're one of the people leading the charge.
Yeah, all right. And you should know, brother, because you got your feet.
You ought to know, man, because you're right there with them.
Your initials are in a wet cement.
I
heard
that.
All right, now.
And you're praising Romney. Well, Romney's nothing but a fascist. I mean, Romney is nothing more than the candidate of big business. It's a combination of the government and big business, corporatism, right. Which is fascism,
Well, let's go back
in the economic sense.
Let's go back to this timeline because
sure.
We have, all right, Coolidge does nothing. Now remember, these are the days when the new president didn't take office until March,
right.
Not like January as it is now. So you had a very long period, comparatively, with a lame duck president. Now this carried through to Roosevelt also, but at any rate, so yeah, you're right. Coolidge is gone. Hoover comes in. He's a one-term president, and of course, yes, he does definitely preside over the stock market crash and then the beginning of the Depression. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I said this to you, but I said it on another audio, that story, and stop me, seriously, if you've heard this, where the talk about how the New Deal wasn't necessarily, I mean, it isn't. The New Deal was no more authored by FDR than the Obama health care bill was authored by Obama. Stop.
No,
all right?
Really.
But the story goes that they told FDR you're going to have to go sell the Banking Act and everything along that goes with it, along with the trading with the enemy. And FDR's like, I don't want to do that. Why don't you let Herbert do that? Herbert's like, I'm not doing that. So the powers that be said, guess what? If, Frankie, you're doing it.
Yeah.
So, and of course this took off right after, it was in 33 that this all began.
Yeah.
So my point is, you're right. The stuff goes down the toilet while Coolidge is the president. Hoover can't stop the bleeding. In fact, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. And then FDR comes on the scene and all of a sudden, is riding the white horse and brings in the New Deal. And of course, all the American communists are like laying on their back, kicking their legs, laughing their asses to death because they know what's going on here. And of course, we said that about William Z. Forster writing that book, and Bella died
one
too.
Thing about the New Deal that's interesting, and a lot of people associate the New Deal with the left. It's really not the left. I mean, it's the socialist part of the right. It's the when you get down to it, there was a cabinet meeting early on in the quote New Deal where they brought in the I forget the title of the book, but it was written by Giovanni Gentile, who was the brains behind fascism. And it was a book which explained, the different machinations that they did in the economy, in the planned economy. And, the idea of putting people back to work by public works, that was a fascist invention. That was something Gentile came up with. There was all kinds of things within the New Deal that, were fascist, and like we were talking about earlier, it's true that when you get to the extremes of the left and the extremes of the right, somehow they kind of circle around and meet again in the middle. So it really, the whole idea behind it was a planned economy and more government intrusion into the lives of the American citizens.
Now, when we had a spate of state-oriented control, it was because it was supposedly the antidote to terrorism. So, of course, whatever happened under Shrub Bush, he could point to 2001 as being the problem, and everybody backs away.
Yeah, we've got all this terrible terrorism, so we've got to have this Patriot Act, and we have to clamp down, in our movements. We have to clamp down on who's allowed to get on, we have to search people in with these intrusive techniques to get on airplanes. And, and we have to have this homeland security. We have to ratchet up the police state because we've got all these terrorists. Hitler used the same thing, the Reichstag fire. I mean, after the Reichstag fire, they came up with the Enabling Act, which was basically the same thing as the Patriot Act, only maybe a little less intrusive. So that doesn't make you a little scared.
But the formula has always been that if the Republicans impose what I would call state-led, totalitarian, tainted or tinted legislation, it's okay because we had this terrorist event, so man, we got to take care of this.
Right. The way I've always looked at it is they have a use for both parties. Whenever they want to steal all your money and ratchet up the police state, they put in the Republicans. Whenever they want to get you into a war, they put in the Democrats. And I think that tells you what I think is going to happen in the second part of the Obama administration. Well,
now, here's another interesting thing also. I'm not debating or at all disagreeing with what you said.
Yes.
What's also interesting, though, is that certain things do kind of leak over to the other party, which you wouldn't necessarily kind of align with that. And here's where I'm going with that. The Patriot Act was underneath a Republican administration. We understand that 9/11 was the cause. Okay, fine. Mm-hmm. But we also had a nasty one back in around, I think, 52, under Truman, a Democrat, called the Internal Security Act.
Right.
That didn't get a knife completely put into its heart until I believe it was a legislator from Florida by the name of Pepper. I think it was Claude Pepper. Mm-hmm. Around 72, I think, or 74.
Yeah, Claude Pepper was an old New Deal liberal.
Okay, is that right?
Yeah.
Was he an old Dixie?
An old New Deal liberal.
An old Dixiecrat. Is that true?
Yeah, he was. And when I say liberal, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. That was back when liberals stood for something. You know,
Yeah.
back when they believed in, you know, the idea of, civil liberties, and whenever they believed in the government trying to help the common man, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
You know, just like a real conservatives used to be a good thing, well, real liberals used to be a good thing too, but now, you know, it doesn't mean anything.
What's interesting is there wasn't a shooting event like 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
This was the supposed amorphous, take you over at nighttime threat of communism, if you remember.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you and I don't remember really, except we probably remember a couple of.
Well, the Nazis got that going with the Reichstag fire, and gosh, the communists were so useful as a boogeyman. And don't get me wrong, communism was a serious totalitarian system, which was a threat. But I mean, it was so blown out of proportion, and obviously the Reichstag fire was an inside job, just as 9/11 was.
Yeah.
And the whole idea behind it was to put Hitler into a position of being an absolute dictator, and it worked. But he just pumped up the idea of communist terrorism. That's why it happened. It was the communists. They burned down the Reichstag, when in reality the Nazis themselves burned it down and blamed it on a scapegoat, a man named Vanderlooper, who was found there in the half naked. And the man had extremely bad eyesight, was almost legally blind, and was mentally retarded. And really, I don't think he even knew where he was. I think they just kind of shoved him into the area, as it was starting to burn.
And so made him the fall guy.
Yeah, he was
right.
a patsy. And he couldn't really defend himself. They said, well, he was a communist because he was Dutch, so he was a foreigner to start with. And the point is that the communists said, well, he tried to join the party, but he was not allowed to join the party because we didn't think he was mentally capable. So
no, good point.
He tried to join, so therefore he's a communist.
Well, but it goes to show you that communism has been a very able boogeyman.
Oh yeah, it's a great boogeyman.
And in Germany used it.
Terrorism's even better. It used to be communist terrorists. Now it's Islamic terrorists.
Oh yeah, but again, in the wake of World War II, when they killed a bad old Nazi, there had to be somebody to fill that breach to be hated and feared.
Oh yeah. And
so James Burnham and George Kennan and the group created the specter of communism, which of course Khrushchev helped out whenever he could.
From the Nazis, which we brought over during Project Paperclip. The Nazis never died. It's just that they came over to America and became part of the American system. And as they came in, they were planning to make America into part of the Fourth Reich. I think the actual plan was to defeat both the United States and the Soviet Union and to pit them against each other as long as they could, and then that they would eventually emerge as the winners over both of those countries. And it's working. Sure.
Well, now, as you said, communism has given over to Islamo-terrorism.
Yeah.
That the milieu that.
And speaking of that, there's something I wanted to follow up today. We talked about the Arab Spring becoming a nuclear winter. Well, for all those people who thought what a great democratic revolution they were having in Egypt last year.
Well, they did, but it isn't good.
It turns out that the democratic revolution resulted in, and I saw the statistic yesterday or the day before, 72% of the members of parliament are Islamist. 42% of them are Muslim members of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the other 30% are Islamic, are members of the Salafist Party, which is even more radical than the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood is starting to make noise about how they are going to eventually attack Israel, and that so all those people that thought, gosh, we got to get rid of that dictator Mubarak. Well, you got rid of Mubarak, who at least kept the lid on those people, and now they've gone wild, and you're going to have and the Muslim Brotherhood is nothing more than the old Arab Nazis. That's who they are. These were the people. The Muslim Brotherhood came to being as Nazis. They were a group which was used by the Third Reich. they promised Hitler and the Third Reich that if it got to the point where Rommel had started to reach into Egypt, if he got his forces into Egypt and was going to try to take over, that they would kill as many American and British soldiers as they possibly could. I mean, they're on record saying that. The Muslim Brotherhood gave birth to, Hajj Hussein, Al-Hussein, I can't remember the guy's name, but Al-Husseini. Anyway, the man was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was probably the most vicious Jew hater of all time, and a member of the Third Reich. In fact, he led a Waffen SS division in Europe, in Bosnia, during the Second World War. And I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood, has a long track record of being Nazi. I mean, they're extreme right, they're extreme fascist, just with an Islamic twist, and they are going to implement Sharia law in Egypt, and it's just going to ratchet up the pressure. So that's how much good that did as far as the Arab Spring.
No, that was just a regime change.
Yeah.
That everybody thought was going to be good. And the reason I said that thing about democracy, and we've had these discussions, and that is even one of the biggest patriot myths is that democracy is a good thing. It's not. It was portrayed as a good thing. We were told it was a good thing. Mm-hmm. But if you go back to Plato's taxonomy, I mean, democracy out of the 4 forms of government is number 3, only to be followed by tyranny.
Yeah. Well, down through history, every republic's been followed up by a dictatorship.
But I mean, even
an empire.
And I don't mean to sell this to you now during your time, but I mean, what I started to realize about democracy, it's that the majority rules. Well, you can change that to majority with the mob word, and the reason I say that. Let me get. I don't want to affix that to you. Here's my point: if you can propagandize the majority. Whether it's a mob-like element or not, and usually it is. I mean, that's where they get to. My point is, you've got everybody you need. All you have to do is propagandize the masses, and you got it.
Right.
You can sell anything you want to, though they think they decided it, and that's what happened here in the United States. And that's why
the use of mass propaganda with people like Bernays, they perfected techniques a long time ago. I mean, let's face the facts. The powers that be, the oligarchy that really runs this country, which is in fact an oligarchy because it's generational.
Of course it is.
And they perfected a technique. They knew they could do whatever they wanted and steer the government of this country any way they wanted, as long as they could control the media. And they bought up all the newspapers back in the 19th century. And in the 20th century, they bought up all the radio stations and the television stations or television networks, and they pretty much have steered the American public any way they want it steered. And all the hysteria, the Red Scare of the 40s, late 40s, and the 50s, that was all done intentionally.
Sure.
I mean, it was all so overblown. That it. Looking back on it, it's laughable, but back then people were really shaking in their boots.
Larry, I don't know if you remember this or not. I do. Okay, now, I'm just going to take you back because it was downright frightening for a grammar school kid as I was. Mm-hmm. I'll say I was 8 or 9. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you remember this or not, because it depends on what kind of show it was in your own local area or whatever. But, being in the New York metropolitan area, you got like a lot of stuff that perhaps a lot of people didn't see. Or be that as it may. But they would portray, the hammer and sickle. Mm-hmm. If you remember this in black and white, like almost Pathé newsreel stuff, as pouring over as a shadow across Europe and across the Atlantic. Yeah. Do you remember that stuff, man?
Yeah, I remember that crap.
That got me a little bit worked up.
Yeah.
And then what they would do is, and of course, like, here's what I'm saying, good old Nikita, they cut to Nikita banging his shoe at the UN. Remember that stuff?
Yeah, that fool fed right into that. I mean,
he knew exactly what he was doing. Yeah.
I remember And he was such an ugly mother. I mean, he was such a sinister-looking character. He looked like, the communist dictator from hell,
The funny thing about that is Nikita had a wife that looked just like him.
Oh, my God.
I mean, they both look like refrigerators with heads.
I've seen his son. I don't know how many kids he had, but he had one son who apparently was part of the government in Russia, in the Soviet Union at one time, and is, I guess, a writer or something.
Yeah, he is. He's a pretty glib guy, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was talking about his dad and, and the things that happened back then. It's kind of interesting, but...
Well, you don't know how much you can take seriously, but at least it was pretty interesting, the stuff he put out. You're absolutely right. I remember when it was out there.
Yeah.
But to just sum up with all this, my point was underneath a Democrat, you had the Internal Security Act, also called the McCarran Act. This was born out of an era of fear and the Russians. And it came out of a democratic regime. And they let that thing sit for almost 20 years. And it was never enforced, which was a good thing. Mm-hmm. But it made, I'll be honest with you, when am I not honest with you? I mean, it made the Patriot Act look like, I don't know, Grimm's fairy tales.
I've never read the McCarran Act. It's probably awfully long to read anyway. I know I haven't read the Patriot Act except the selected portions that, people like to bring up. But
here's the situation.
I don't know if I heard it on your show or somebody else said it, but I've heard the McCarran Act was even more draconian than the Patriot Act, and that's pretty scary. In this sense,
in its vagueness, it encompassed almost anything. In other words, you could make that thing do what you wanted it to do.
Right.
It was, there was an offshoot of that called, they wanted people who were going to work in government positions to take a loyalty oath. They wanted to, actually move that into other sectors. And that's where people were going, I don't know about that.
Right.
But it was so expansive and so broad and so vague that you can make that dog do whatever you wanted it to do. And that's where it was dangerous. Thank goodness it got put into a grave by Pepper back in 72, really never used. And I think you'll agree with me on this. I mean, when I look back at what we read every day, what we watched on TV every day, and I'm talking about a period between, say, 67 through 71, I mean, honest to goodness, it makes what's going on today look like child's play.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying I wish that would come back or, this is good what's happening now. But I tell you, it can get weird, and it's going to get weirder than what we went through. Mm-hmm. But I tell you, Larry, there's times when I'm like, this world is totally unhinged. Gravity doesn't work. I can't take anything at all as the truth. And, it turned me into basically, screw y'all. I'm doing what I'm doing, because this whole thing is it's like the Titanic.
Well, I think the Kennedy assassination and then the war in Vietnam and all the things that went down as far as what the media was feeding the public and what was actually happening is what really disturbed me. And I was very young when all that was going on, and it was very disturbing to realize, we're being lied to. And I kept going, man, why are they lying, And I couldn't figure it all out as to why. I knew it wasn't just that they were making mistakes in what they were telling us. These were deliberate lies. And then I began to realize that there were powerful interests that wanted us to believe certain things because that was in their interest to control us. And once that all sort of soaked in, it was kind of frightening to me. It was. I remember one thing that about the Kennedy assassination that was really amazing to me was when it became apparent to me that they were lying about where the nature of his wound. In other words, I saw a couple of interviews with doctors at Parkland Hospital who were telling about their experience and what they saw, and they were describing the wound in Kennedy's head as a large, evulsive wound on the bottom right side of the back of his skull.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that couldn't possibly have been a wound of entrance, and therefore it couldn't have possibly come from behind.
Right.
And it was and they were saying that, a large portion of his brains were blown out there. Well, obviously the bullet that hit him had to come from the front or the right front. And then when you saw the Zapruder film where his head goes back into the left, I believe what is it, the fourth law of physics that the fourth law Sir Isaac Newton came up with, Newton's law, is that for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction. And I mean, I was familiar with firearms. I've been around guns all my life, and I know that whenever you fire into a target,
it's a small wound on the entry.
You get a small entrance wound and then a large wound, of exit. That's just physics, and it doesn't make any sense that this man was hit by a high caliber bullet from behind and his face stayed intact. I mean, his face is intact.
I know.
You can see it in the film.
I know. That's
What
why.
sense does that make? And then I began to realize, wow, these suckers are lying to us. And I remember when Jim Garrison was trying Clay Shaw, and he wanted to use the Zapruder film as evidence because he had heard that it would support his case. And they went to Time Life, who had taken the film. They had a guy work on it, a guy named Robert Groden, who became a JFK researcher, and he is still, carrying the torch for that. Anyway, they had him working on it, but they locked it away, and for years, and they had no intention of ever showing it to the public. And Groden said that, when he saw it, he realized that he'd been lied to. At any rate, when Garrison tried to get the film, Time Life went to the Supreme Court. It had to go all the way to the Supreme Court for him to subpoena that film. And finally, he was allowed to get it, and he made copies of it. And that's the reason why you have copies of it today, because of Garrison.
But let's look at this also. Once again, it's like when you go for a FOIA, you don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
They'll give you what they want to. Or they'll give you everything, and they'll obviously redact stuff with a black magic marker.
Right.
Honestly, that Zapruder film has been so monkeyed with.
Yeah, it has. It has. And in fact, Groden was pointing that out. There's quite a few people that say it was doctored. But even at that, you see the moment of impact, and you see the man's face is intact. That can't happen.
Right.
It can't.
Right. Exit wounds are nasty because bullets tumble.
Right.
And they expand and expend their energy, and they come out in a very nasty way.
The size of that wound, the exit wound.
Yes.
Kennedy's head. It's huge, man.
Yep.
And it had to come from the front or the front right, which would be the area of the grassy knoll. But I don't want to get into all the mechanics of the Kennedy assassination. What I wanted to talk about
were assassinations.
Yeah, the assassination. Who did it and why?
Well, let's talk about this just for a second.
Sure.
We know that there are hardcore assassinations and attempts, okay? And then there are other ones that I think we all believe were assassinations, but they were quite some time ago. We can go back to the 30s.
Yeah.
But you still have to wonder through attempts, successful attempts, and those that aren't recorded necessarily as such, and one of them is that the newspapers recorded, and I got to go back and grab that image. Because Charles Wilcox had captured it but not transferred it over when he did a repackaging of his book, which was Democracy Under Siege, which became Transformation of the Republic. He didn't bring that he didn't bring that image over. I'm like, geez, why didn't you do that? Because the newspapers clearly said Buchanan attempted assassination in his inaugural party. This is James Buchanan, 1856. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we have all these things, but here's my point. We talk about our government as being so much better, so much more civilized, and I don't think any nation in the developed world, whatever that means, has more assassinations per head of state than we do.
Oh.
All right, and then as you were saying, or you were citing from what Judge was writing about, that assassination is a tool of fascism, and I would say, well, yeah, and really, what nation is above that whole thing?
Right.
But it seems to definitely have been too much I was just going to say, it's just too much of a part of our political landscape for us to just laugh it away as the old lone gunman thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the Weimar Republic days, they brought back, the FEMA, which was nothing more than a secret tribunal. They'd say, this guy's got to go, and somebody would go kill him. And in the days of the Weimar Republic, these were former Army and Navy officers who were killing the people that they wanted gotten rid of. And of course, the FEMA was a result of secret societies that were running, the German nation long before even the idea of fashion, long before the idea of the Industrial Revolution, for that matter. But the idea was, in that society, the cops and the judges were in their back pockets, and the cops would usually let these people get away without arresting them. And even when somebody did arrest them, who didn't really know the deal, they would be given these light sentences. Here in America, it's being done differently, but it's basically being done by people who are the spawn of the Third Reich, so to speak. There's a great deal of Nazi connections there are definite Nazi connections to the assassinations of John Kennedy, RFK, and MLK. I'll talk about as we go on.
Also, we have to think, I'll just throw this out there. Bremer?
Yeah.
On Bremer. George Wallace?
Yeah.
And, real quick, I don't know where you want to... Are you going to go and deal with particular assassinations? How are you going to handle this for the rest of this particular audio?
For this audio, I just wanted to talk about the Kennedy assassination.
Okay, all right.
There's so much material and so many issues and avenues you could go down that I had to narrow it down, somewhat. I thought what I would talk about in this one was, the Weimar Republic, how it all got started, and then talk about the Nazi connections to the Kennedy assassination. And
all
then in the next episode, we could talk about RFK, MLK, and even Bremer and Wallace, but the reason I picked the JFK assassination is it was the first major one that was, of all time, the most terrific, shock to the nation. And I think that it put us on we had a lot of problems prior to his assassination, but that assassination just derailed any hope for this country to continue to be any type of republic.
All right, before I throw it back to you and let you go through this,
sure.
Let me just ask you this, okay? This is my particular feeling, because I've been thinking about this, since we talked, and also when I started doing this thing while we slept, just telling folks how I finally got to the point that I did.
Yeah.
And you and I both lived in an era which was very bizarre, because, I actually saw a murder on TV.
I saw the same thing, and I was sitting there with my father, just like you.
Yeah, and then we go through high school, and there's another two.
Oh yeah. I was in college when those two took place. I was 19 when that happened. Yeah.
But here's what I wanted to say. Looking back on it, I would have thought that more stuff would have come unglued. However, I think all of us were under the spell of these are just bad individuals that don't represent any kind of government or movement. They're three bad people, and I think that's how we all explained away. How not to freak out about
the assassination to me. When I started looking at it a little more carefully as I got a little older, it made less and less sense. The thing that really shocked me, worse than just Kennedy being assassinated, which was bad enough, was the fact that a guy could get into the Dallas police station and kill the assassin, quote, assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. When Jack Ruby gets in there and kills him, my dad, I remember just being stunned and looking over at my dad, who was on the couch, and I was sitting in a chair. My dad just looked at me with a stunned look, and then after a few seconds, he goes, "How did that guy get in the police station with a gun?" My dad was always a very matter-of-fact guy, very logical. And he just looked at that like, that makes no sense at all, We were just like, what is going on in this? It was like all the rules are out, give me a break. And another thing that when we started talking about it, he was going, those two cops brought him out. He said they had him in a position where he couldn't escape the guy. He couldn't escape getting shot. And I remember seeing an interview with one of those cops later on in The Men Who Killed Kennedy, And he lied his butt off. He said, well, we told Oswald that, if anybody tries to get him, well, he knew what was going to happen. He'd be on the ground. Well, did you see either one of those guys try to put him on the ground?
No.
Heck no. They held him up, man. It was almost like they held him up like, okay, Jack, hurry up, Jack.
I know, they spread him out, yeah.
Yeah, there's no way both these guys were like probably over 200 pounds. Oswald was a small guy. There's no way he could wrestle free from a man on either side of him holding him up like that. You could tell Oswald was trying to you could see he was freaking out, knowing the guy was going to kill him. He knew Ruby. He knew what Ruby was going to do. Okay, really, the assassination of John F. Kennedy had roots in the Nazis. It had Nazi connections, and I wanted to go into that. And one of the people who did some of the best work ever done on the Kennedy assassination was a lady named Mae Brussel, who was a housewife who started to do research on it and became a political commentator. At any rate, she wrote an essay back in 1983 called "The Nazi Connection to the John F. Kennedy Assassination," and she starts off talking about one of the principal characters who had a connection to it, who was General Reinhard Gehlen, and we talked about who Gehlen was. Said in the eyes of the CIA, Reinhard Gehlen was an asset of staggering potential. He was a professional spy master, violently anti-communist, and best of all, the controller of a vast underground network still in place inside Russian frontiers. His checkered past mattered not. He's on our side, and that's all that matters, chuckled Alan Dulles, a U.S. intelligence officer during the war who later headed the CIA.
I got one question real quick.
Sure.
You just made me think.
Okay.
If some of these Nazis that were trying to ingratiate themselves into the American system or were just blatantly being assimilated,
mm-hmm.
did one of the things that got them there just the fact that they were, quote, anti-communists?
Well, the main thing was, yeah, they were anti-communist. That's very important. All Nazis were anti-communist. But the main thing that got Reinhard Gehlen there was that he had a whole network. He was head of the espionage of the Eastern Front. He was the spy master on the Eastern Front. So he was the guy who was directly working a spy network within the Soviet Union. So he would be very useful to the CIA.
All right. So the answer would be it would make it a lot slipperier. Oh man, easier. To get these people past some who might have questions if you say, oh man, the guy's a staunch anti-communist. Come on now, we got to have this guy.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The deal Gehlen struck with the Americans was not for obvious reasons released to the Washington Post. As Heinz Hohn and Hermann Zolling phrased it in The General Was a Spy, the German general took his entire apparatus, unpurged and without interruption, into the service of the American superpower. There is no evidence that he ever renounced the Third Reich's post-war plan, advanced by his own family's publishing house, to colonize vast regions of eastern Russia, create a huge famine for 40 million, and treat the remaining 50 million racially, quote, racially inferior Slavs as slaves. Alan Dulles may not have invited such a man to his club, but he did the next best thing. He funneled an aggregate $200 million in CIA funds to the Gehlen organization as it became known. Directing operation from a fortress-like nerve center in Bavaria, Gehlen reactivated his network inside Russia. Soon, news of the first Russian jet fighter, the MiG-15, was channeled back to the West. In 1949, the general scored an espionage coup when he turned up Soviet plans for the remilitarization of East Germany. When Dulles spoke, Gehlen listened. The CIA chief was convinced, along with his brother, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, that the captive nations of the Soviet bloc would rise up if given sufficient encouragement. At his behest, Gehlen recruited and trained an exile mercenary force ready to push Russia in without involving American units. Also at Dulles' direction, Gehlen tapped the ranks of his wartime Russian collaborators for a cadre of spies to be parachuted into the Soviet Union. Some of these spies were schooled at the CIA's clandestine base at Atsugi, Japan, where in 1957 a young Marine named Lee Harvey Oswald was posted to the U-2 spy plane operation there. Atsugi was only one station on Oswald's Far East intelligence route. He was also at the U-2 base at Subic Bay in the Philippines and for a short while at Pingtung, Taiwan. In 1959, he was transferred to a Marine base at Santa Ana, California for instructions in radar surveillance. His training officer had graduated from the Georgetown School of Foreign Service, which had close agency ties. In May 1960, when President Eisenhower was planning a summit meeting with Soviet Premier Khrushchev, a U-2 was shot down over Russia and its pilot captured. The pilot, Francis Gary Powers, later blamed his demise on Lee Harvey Oswald. The U-2 affair effectively sabotaged Ike's summit meeting. Well, I've read a book by a man named Fletcher Prouty, who was the CIA's liaison with the Air Force at the time. He was a colonel in the Air Force.
And wasn't Prouty supposed to be embodied in the movie JFK by Donald Sutherland's character?
Yeah. It was really, it didn't happen like that, but he took poetic license or, dramatic license with that. But yes, Oliver Stone became a very good friend of Fletcher Prouty. Anyway, what Prouty says is that the U-2 was sabotaged by the CIA itself, and it wasn't actually shot down by the Russians, even though the Russians enjoyed claiming the credit. And the whole idea was to derail the summit meeting, so Ike was not going to be able to make any kind of a deal with the Soviets at that point.
All right, hold it right there. First of all, I definitely believe, I think you do too, don't you, that we shot ourselves in the foot with Powers?
Yeah.
Secondly, I think we can admit, and this is interesting, if you can take anything from what Khrushchev said in his later days, he said, while I dealt with Eisenhower, I knew he never was the president. It was John Foster Dulles.
Right.
That sounds good to me. And thirdly, let's put it this way. Ike was no politician. He was beloved by the whole nation and both parties. They ran Adlai Stevenson against him twice, and he got his butt so thoroughly kicked it was embarrassing.
Yeah.
But my point was...
Ike was such a hero because of his leadership in the Second World War. And to be honest about it, he was an able man, and he did a really good job in leading the Allies during the Second World War.
He was a general, not a politician.
Right, exactly.
But my point is, they didn't want...
So there was a mafia figure who said, when we wanted to deal with the White House, we always talked to Nixon. Nixon's the guy who runs the place. Ike's just the guy who goes out and plays golf all the time.
Kind of shades of Reagan and Bush.
Yeah.
I also think that he didn't have the stomach for this stuff. He was a fighter like MacArthur was. He was not a politician. Right. And I think he shut up. My parents, who voted Republican, said, Truman played the piano, Ike goes out and golfs. Nobody's around anyway.
Right.
Do the least amount of damage. However, I think Ike, you can say, why now, man? Or you can say, okay, at least you fessed up. In that famous speech with Kennedy sitting behind him, talking about the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, his final speech where he talked about the growing influence of the military-industrial complex, I think he was trying to shoot a warning to the American public, but I think it was too little too late.
Yes.
And I think he was responsible for turning a blind eye to all the things that the Dulles brothers had pulled off.
But also remember
those two bastards were nothing but Nazis. At least Allen for sure was a Nazi.
Man.
But that guy was. He did all kinds of things that were traitorous. He committed treason against this country during the Second World War, and he's the guy who was more than anybody responsible for bringing Nazis like Galen into this country.
Also, it's funny because I related this in one of the audios I did with Ramsey, where I found out that in World War I, in order to turn this country again into being jingoistic, William Jennings Bryan was trying to be a voice of reason, and there were certain parties that did not want that to happen. One was advanced by a Robert Lansing, who was the uncle of the Dulles brothers. Yeah. And when I told that to Ramsey, he goes, "Jeez, they're everywhere." The other hawk was Tumulty, who's a very little-known figure in that triad, and the third person would be, of course, Mandel House. But again,
in that era, yeah.
But isn't it generational, like you said?
It is. It's an oligarchy. It seems like all nations at some point or another are controlled by an oligarchy.
Well,
and this country definitely is. But, they're running around Yahoo for the red, white, and blue all the time, and, we are a free country, and we have democracy, and you can vote, for whoever you want. You can take Tweedledee or you can take Tweedledum, and it's like, I mean, who's kidding who, man?
Well,
I mean, this country is run by a powerful oligarchy of people that run the show, and the ordinary citizen doesn't have any real input. They're going to do what they want to do, and
actually, what you're saying though too, because it is generational, and we're not going to split hairs about this,
right?
But oligarchy, if it's generational, is aristocracy. It's almost like monarchy.
Well, the thing is, the oligarchy runs things from behind the scene. In an aristocracy, you would have them more or less plugged into the Congress and into the offices. They would be visible to you. But oligarchy is more run behind the scenes. But we'll get into definitions later.
All right. No, good point. Because again, in that taxonomy by Plato,
yeah,
who was a statist and didn't like little people anyway. So I don't really think I would want to go out to eat with Plato. But he said,
I mean, the thing that gets me, I saw a British political commentator one time being interviewed on a show, and he goes, one thing I don't understand about America, he says, America refuses to admit that it is run by an oligarchy and it is an empire. He said, in Britain, we've had to admit that. I mean, it was obvious to the whole world. We even called our government the British Empire.
Well, damn, Larry, he ought to know that they were running us. I mean, it's true. I mean,
when you get down to it, I mean, it's just the old, the old Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, and that's pretty. I mean, there's some, other groups involved in it now in our country, but by and large, when you get down to it, especially with the East Coast, it's the old Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, people that came over and settled in the Americas back in the 1700s.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so with that individual saying what he did, I mean, it almost is tongue-in-cheek because, damn, we should be that because that's exactly what you guys made us.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, listen, at least...
Yeah, you got to watch the Brits, man. They're sneaky.
Oh, yeah.
They know how to... The thing about the Brits, I'm not talking about the ordinary British people. I'm talking about the people that run them, just like the people that run us. Is the way that they will pit groups against each other. They'll pit nations against each other, and do it so carefully and so quietly that it's not really understood until it's all over.
But I mean, just put yourself in a position, especially out in the Midwest, because those people pretty much are willing to think for themselves, and at least in the early part of the 20th century, as you know, when there wasn't the electronic media we have now, those people kind of got it. And the thing that always struck me was that they weren't real happy about going into World War I, and especially World War II, because they're like, we got no fight, we got no dog in that fight. Mm-hmm. Why are we doing this? And I mean, I had to laugh. And they were also the ones that were pretty hip to the fact of what was going on by FDR, and although many of them may have been the recipients of the...
Well, to be honest with you, not Roosevelt, but Churchill made a statement to one of his aides where he said that one day the aide was saying, I came in to speak to Mr. Churchill, and he had a big smile on his face and looked satisfied. And he said, so-and-so, I've finally come up with a reason, I finally got it going. I know what we're going to do to win the war now. And he goes, well, what is that, sir? He said, we're going to drag the United States into it. Well, he did it in the First World War, and he did it in the Second World War.
No, and Ramsey and I were talking...
It's not that simple. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's not that simple. But, I mean, that is part of what happened.
Larry, it's that simple.
But we have ties with Britain. We're always going to have ties with them.
Well,
and, it's going to happen. That, the aristocracies, the oligarchies that run the two countries are related by blood, and they are related, as far as their attitudes and their upbringing, etc. And that's just part of it.
But I would submit that it is that easy in this sense. And again, this is something we were dealing with, Ramsey and I. And, we were just not laughing, but shaking our head in a sense about how pathetic it is to a certain degree. But the King of England, who really, the aristocracy is not dead. They're not foolish. They just sat back and realized, let them have their little social democracy thing. Okay. So we've got the Prime Minister of England. We've got the King of England understanding what was going on with the Lusitania, because Churchill is probably one of the two people who called off the naval escort for the Lusitania, which, my God, had already passed around the bottom of Ireland. I mean, they were almost
some terrible things in his career.
But they knew
he really did. He did some good things, I guess. But I'm sorry. I mean, I have no problem with us wanting to fight the Nazis. I really don't. I mean, I think they deserve to be fought. But the problem was, we shouldn't have been pitted against them. You know?
Well, no, but I mean, we're talking about World War I when it was absolutely no.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree that World War I was a total washout for the United States. That we were dragged into it on false pretenses, you know, with, there were a lot of things going on. Now, it is true that the Germans did have an espionage, ring in the United States, and it is true that the Germans were trying to foment a war between the United States and Mexico. But, but the British aristocracy, whatever you want to call it, oligarchy, was really basically did help pull us into that war on their side. And if it hadn't been for the United States, I mean, even Hindenburg said this when he was telling the truth to George Seldes, is the reason that they lost the war was that the United States came in with too many men and too much materiel, and that they were, you know, just too exhausted at that point to win it all. But until the United States kicked in, the British and the French were almost, they were on the ropes.
I could have seen the Germans less blameless, and again, this goes back to the script. I'm sorry to say, but, you know, whatever that was about. In World War II, I mean, yeah, nobody wants to be dealing with the Nazis. There's no two ways about it. But again, the United States people at that time were not interested in getting into a second European continental war.
Right.
That's the reason why, believe it or not, that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, because of that tripartite agreement between Japan, Italy, and Germany, which said attack upon one is attack upon all.
Well, the reason Japan attacked at Pearl Harbor is because we pushed them into it. Yeah, I mean, here they were. It became clear to them the United States was not going to allow them to have the oil in the East Indies.
They definitely cut them off, and that meant that Japan had to go elsewhere.
They were pushed into it. It's a complicated scenario, but they saw us as their main enemy. And don't get me wrong, the Japanese got what they deserved, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not saying, each and every individual, but the Japanese government got what it deserved. And some of the atrocities that they committed against the people in Asia were just incredible. They were every bit as cruel as the Nazis, or maybe even more so.
Well, if you talk to Koreans and Chinese, they will tell you the Japanese are the Nazis of the Asian
well, they
perimeter.
basically were in those days. I mean, they were fascist. Their government was fascist. We haven't talked much about them in the series, but my dad was telling me things that he saw when he was over there in the liberation of the Philippines. Just the barbarian type activity by the Japanese against the Filipinos.
Look,
and we don't need to get into all that.
No, the rape in Nanking and all that. I got that.
Yeah,
we did coerce them into it. But what's interesting is this, and I tell you, do you remember that movie from our early days, Tora, Tora, Tora?
Yeah.
The thing I think that is priceless in that, and I'll also say this. One of the things I thought was interesting about Godfather, and I think you'll remember this, when they go and they have like the birthday party for Don Corleone, and Michael says, "I've enlisted."
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that Robert Duvall, who was the consigliere, Tom, who was not part of the family but was adopted, says, "Well, we should have known this was going to happen when we put the embargo on Japan."
Right.
Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't know about you. That's the first time I ever heard that. After 12 years of public education and 2 of college, I never heard that we played a part in what you just said, goading the Japanese because we're not giving you the oil, and you're not going to.
The thing was, you had the America First movement, and a lot of them were real right-wing bastards, but the America First movement was doing everything it could to jack up Roosevelt and to keep him from, getting into the Second World War. and there was some legitimacy to that. I understood that. But he needed some method by which he could get us into the war, because the way they felt about it, if we didn't get into it on the side of Britain very quickly, that the Brits were going to go down, and then it would be hell to go over and try to fight the Germans on the European continent, because you would have had to have a full-scale, amphibious invasion, and we didn't have enough, men and ships and et cetera to do that. So at any rate, they were pretty happy to come up with some method of getting the Japanese to attack us. Now, actually, I don't really. This is one thing you and I disagree on. I don't really think the Germans had to, declare war on us, because they declared war on us first about 3 days after Pearl Harbor.
That's because of the tripartite agreement.
Well, I mean, Hitler was very big on breaking any kind of treaty he ever made. He didn't have to, but he wanted to. He saw the United States as being, the country that they really had to beat to take over. Well, there are two countries, that and Russia, but he saw Russia as being kind of pretty much a cakewalk. He thought that he underestimated the toughness and also the industrial capability of the Soviet Union.
All right, I'll say this. I don't know if we disagree, but we might. The only thing what I'm saying is that I do believe in the script, still again, and Hitler knew that this was going to happen.
Right.
He understood as soon as Japan attacked that all three nations, Italy, Germany, and Japan, were in it. I will say, and I'm going to ask you, I'm really posing this as a question. I want to hear from you about this. I think that he was in the mix, knew exactly what was going on, and gave up his country and got out by stealth of night.
Talking about Hitler?
Yes.
There's a lot of people that believe that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure if he didn't just go ahead and commit suicide. It could have gone either way.
But
there were many people that said Bormann, had been killed in Bormann turned up later in South America. I mean, they try to say, well, there's DNA evidence and all that, but they showed how that was faked up. And Yuki Goni, who is an Argentine anti-fascist journalist, done a great deal of study on that, and he's shown how Bormann eventually, I think, wound up in Paraguay. But Bormann set up, a network by which the Third Reich continued and rebuilt West Germany. But we've been through all that.
But let me bring you back to this, though.
Yeah.
And that is, when your military generals want to commit a junta and kill your ass, they're probably figuring out that you're nuts or that the fix is in.
Right.
So when you look at that Operation Valkyrie, when you look at who he killed, like Rommel and these other guys, it's like, I think they realize this guy is has the fix in. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. The one thing that I think was going on behind the scenes as far as the way Churchill was looking at things, I think what was strange about Churchill's actions was he wanted to start a second front through Italy, coming up from North Africa into Italy, whereas Roosevelt and Eisenhower kept saying, why do you want to do that? What we want to do is attack them in France, which, of course, we did at Normandy eventually. But for like a year or so, we were coming up through Italy because they finally caved into what Churchill wanted to do. Well, I think what Churchill was doing was playing both sides against the middle. He was hoping that Germany and Russia would just kill off each other as much as possible so that after the war, if we defeated the Germans, we could go ahead and then attack the Russians and take over the entire European continent, or at least Britain would wind up, running the entire European continent, I guess, with American help.
But isn't it interesting, when Patton thought the war was for real, and he wanted to kick the Ruskies' ass, he wound up supposedly in a Jeep accident. And then when MacArthur thought that Korea was really for real, and he went in and kicked some ass when he crossed the parallel, he gets brought home. Isn't it amazing?
It certainly is. And you know that Patton was called down by Eisenhower, was called on the carpet by Eisenhower for for making a speech in front of a group of elderly British ladies. They show it, a depiction of it in the film.
In
Patton.
The movie Patton with George
Remember
Scott,
that?
yes.
It's all this stuff about Anglo-Saxon domination of the. Well, Patton really believed that, and so did Churchill. I believe Churchill. The British Empire was some serious stuff. They believed in Anglo-Saxon domination of the world. And so Eisenhower calls him in and goes, "What are you trying to do? This is racialism. That's what we're trying to fight." He said, "How do you think that looks to the Russians? We're telling them, hey, we got to kill those Germans off because, they want to have German domination of the world. And then we go and you make a statement that, it's going to be the United States and Great Britain, Anglo-Saxon dominance of the world."
Oh, no doubt about it.
But Patton never did. Patton never really backed down on that. So he really believed in that.
And that's why his ass wound up dead.
Yeah.
But the one thing I'll give Patton, I won't give Churchill, is that Patton talked it and he walked it.
Yeah.
I mean, we all look back at that George C. Scott stuff, but I mean, honestly, it also evokes the character that Robert Duvall played in Apocalypse Now, when like in that narrative that Martin Sheen does, it's like the guy knew he wasn't going to get a scratch on him. So he stands up and he's like bombs all over him, and it's the same with Patton, but Patton did it for real.
Yeah.
I mean, he just thought it was not going to happen.
He was kind of a very complex character. He did some things that were really stupid too, like slapping this kid, who had shells on, that kind of stuff.
But what's interesting also from that, and I'm sorry, I'll let you get back there.
Sure.
One of the things that was not wasn't a deliberate result of all this, but something I just caught on to when especially we went into this peak oil crap. Remember, now see how that has disappeared, by the way?
Yeah. We don't hear about it anymore.
Well, where I'm going, and they always said that was a post-World War II fabricated thing, which I really agree with.
Yeah.
But the history recounts that when Patton was chasing the Hunts from France into Germany, he was running out of fuel, and what did he use?
Used synthetic gasoline.
That was used by the Germans. IG Farben.
Yeah. That was IG Farben and good old Standard Oils. The Standard Oil and IG Farben developed that process I can't remember the name. It's basically a process by which you make gasoline from coal, and it's very expensive. But the Germans had a very large plant where they were making that synthetic gasoline, and they ran their vehicles on it, a large number of their vehicles on synthetic gasoline.
But wasn't it interesting though that has never been mentioned? It's not even a possibility when they talk about fuels. And
let me put it to you this way. Guess what company owns the largest amount of coal in the world? And if you thought Standard Oil, you're correct. And I remember sending you a little article about how Standard Oil is perfecting that process by which you can make gasoline from coal and making it cheaper and less dirty.
Yep.
And they're working on it right now. I guarantee you they're probably way, way advanced on it too.
But we'll never get a hold of that. You know that.
Well, what will happen is, I think what the whole end game is once they get the price of regular gasoline, up high enough, they'll go, well, golly, we're going to have to use coal. And then they charge you even more for your synthetic gasoline. Maybe you have to have some kind of a conversion, as far as your fuel injection or whatever, but probably not even that. I mean, the American tanks, which were, run on gasoline, ran just fine on that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the whole point is it's a control thing.
Oh,
and gas.
Well, you got to control the primary source, They're never going to have solar because you can't control the primary source.
No.
These people that think you're going to have solar energy.
And by the way, let me ask you this.
I hate to laugh at somebody, but, how naive can you be? You really think that they want a source of energy which is free to everybody?
There you go.
Which they can't control?
Look,
and all this stuff about using Tesla's work, no, it's not going to happen, folks, because they don't have control of the primary source, which means they can only build you a unit to use, to use the source, and they're not going to do that.
No, folks can do it on an individual level.
Yeah,
but with the emails I've gotten, and people thought that I thought free energy was like not, some kind of canard. I'm like, no. All I'm trying to say is that we can do that.
They could convert over. There's all kinds of things they could do to get us off of fossil fuels, but they're not going to.
No, they're not going to.
Because it's to their advantage to keep using them.
And gas is going to go to $7 a gallon, and people won't go anywhere, and that's exactly what they want you to do.
I was looking the other day, and it's like, I think I paid $3.59 for, when I filled up one day, and then a week later it's $3.79. I'm thinking, wow, man, won't be long. We'll get up there to the $4 a gallon. Probably this summer we'll be getting the $4 a gallon gasoline.
I think $5.
Yeah.
Here's my point. When they
even more rosy.
When they raise gasoline per gallon higher than beer, I'm out in the street.
$100. Say you have a 20-gallon tank. That's $100, man.
I know.
Just to fill up a tank of gasoline.
Also,
there's an awful lot of people that just won't be able to afford to drive a car anymore.
Well,
or if they do, they'll it'll cut so big into their income. That'll be about all they can do is drive to work and come home, and eat a bologna sandwich.
But would you agree with me? What it's about is like we don't want you going anywhere.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Restriction. We talked about that last time. Restriction of travel, which is one of the hallmarks of fascism.
Yeah. Yep, without a doubt, and that's where we're headed. So anyway, all right, we went off that thing, but thank you.
Yeah.
As far as the whole, German-Japan thing went on, that's a very interesting element in it. And I have to tell you one thing, too. I don't think you remember this. I don't even know why I said it. Way back in like 03, 04, when Harry was still around, one of the things we cracked up about was that, you have to have an assassination to trigger something. But do we actually believe that World War I would not have happened if the Archduke didn't get shot? No.
Mm-mm.
Do we? I mean, it would have been something else. You know what I mean?
Well, it was just like we talked about in Suster's book. He was talking about how the spirit of a demonic spirit was leading the world into war. This is the age of Horus, the age of the war.
There you go.
And that's what's coming. I mean,
well, the news
people need to look around them and get a grip on things, realizing there's going to be a third world war, which will be, the result of the first two. We're still living with the results of World War I and II.
But that's what's intended.
And it's going to lead to a third world war.
And by the way, the thing I had to laugh about is that Harry and I both read this. It was a little excerpt in the Tampa Tribune, and we were both at San Leo's at the time, and it was just like a little filler. But the thing that we cracked up about, because quote, we got it, was that the pistol that was used by the assassin of Archduke Ferdinand was found just strangely discovered in the collection of the Jesuits. I kid you not, man.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh about somebody getting shot, but man, that...
Yeah, they had a V8 moment, Larry. They had a head-slapping V8 moment. Oh, we got the gun.
I mean, those guys are behind the scenes. It's like...
I know.
These things go on and people just don't get it, man. They don't get it. It's like, this was a disgruntled student who was a Serbian and he wanted, and they were mistreating his country. Yeah, well, maybe so, but, he was just set up to pull that trick, to get things going because, the Romanists needed that war, man. They were counting on that baby.
All right, one last scenario. I'll throw it over to you and we'll close it out.
Okay.
With assassinations, it always cracks me up because you have to visualize what history has been very, very dry about.
Yeah.
Okay, we had Garfield killed in 81, right?
Right.
All right, not by the bullet by his physicians, but anyway. Now we have McKinley getting shot at the Buffalo Exposition. But here's what bothers me. We have Lincoln assassinated in 65, and then the Secret Service thing happened, but Garfield still got plugged in 81. Now we have McKinley. What were we talking about, like 90, I don't know, 2 or something like that?
Man, I can't remember.
I know, I'm bad with this. It's probably 98.
He's like Millard Fillmore to me. I don't know.
I know. But the important thing is that, Teddy Rex Roosevelt gets in after this.
Yeah.
But Can you imagine being on a handshake in line, a president at the exposition?
Yeah. Guy walks up with a towel
around his gun. Don't you think somebody might have said like,
great Secret Service work?
Yeah, come here with you, the towel hand, come here.
Yeah, it's just totally normal for a guy to walk out with a towel draped over his arm.
And here's where I was going to go with the Roosevelt.
Oh my God.
Teddy got popped when he came out as a third-party candidate.
Right.
And the Bull Moose. Can't understand it. And I actually read the New York Tribune, which people can do.
Well, wasn't it a Bible or something in his pocket?
No, it was. I think it was his speech that was folded up.
It was folded up and it stopped the bullet.
Well, yeah, because it was a manuscript written speech. It was several pages that were triple folded in his pocket. He might have even had his eyeglass case in there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, why would he get popped? And of course, it was an anarchist that was a saloon keeper in New York. I get all that. But the thing I think about Wallace being popped in Laurel by Bremer, and Roosevelt being popped by a guy that supposedly was stalking him, as Bremer was supposedly stalking Wallace, and that is they were all third-party candidates. And although Teddy was definitely thrown in there to pull from Taft, what I think might have happened was, and if you look at the results of that election, I mean, it is so sad that an incumbent got his ass totally kicked by a third-party candidate, and I'm thinking that they thought that he might actually supplant Wilson, who was their boy, because of what they wanted to do. Not that Teddy would have been compliant.
I think that's definitely what happened. Yeah.
I don't know. So anyway, and the thing with Wallace, why shoot Wallace? Because you know what? They might have thought he's getting a little bit too much.
Wallace would drive enough votes away from the right wing and might keep Nixon from being elected.
In an audio I'll release in June for a particular reason, Harry recounts when two guys we both knew. One was Thought Criminal. You remember Thought Criminal?
Yeah. Isn't he dead now, the guy?
Yeah. The Thought Criminal died 3 years ago.
Didn't you say he turned out to be something like a neo-Nazi or something?
He always was. Well, I was at his house like 3 times.
Yeah.
And one time, it was a New Year's Eve, and I and Lady Viz were invited there with Harry and his wife. And Harry used to always look at me going, there's another side to Thought Criminal you don't know. And we went in the house, and he had Nazi flags.
Oh my God!
And
weird.
He always signed his emails what's the birth date of Hitler? 4/18, 19.
Yeah, I can't remember what that
88, was. 88, I think it is.
Yeah, 88. Yeah.
But that's where he always is at. But what happened was, well, then you can understand this. Thought Criminal and another guy we worked with at St. Leo, whose name I will not mention, went down to a Wallace rally in Tampa. And somehow, some way, and like I said, this will be recounted in an audio that will be heard in 2 months, get a chance to talk to Wallace. Wallace turns around and says to these two guys, "Come on my plane before I leave." So they go on the tarmac at Tampa. They go into the plane that's going to whisk Wallace away, and they're drinking some Cokes. And one of the things that Wallace told them both, he goes, "Man, I'm going to tell you right now, there's not a whit's difference between the Republicans and the Democrats." Now, I looked at Harry and I said, well, we know that because he's an independent, but is he really telling us something else like it's all a game? I don't know. Harry doesn't know, but he said that was a priceless moment that both Thought Criminal and the other individual we know both confirmed, and that's what he told them. Yeah,
that was something that he used to say at his rallies. There's not a dime's difference between the Republicans and Democrats.
But one would say, well, that is the reason why you would want independent voters to come to you. But I'm also wondering if he was really being true, saying you ain't getting represented, at all with these two cats. I don't know. We'll never know. But
hard to know. Toward the end of his life, Wallace renounced all the racism and everything that he'd been involved with.
Yeah, I thought that was legitimate. Did you?
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, he went to the Baptist church there in I believe it's in Birmingham where the kids were killed, and he basically told the people he was sorry that he had been wrong. He had been raised a certain way, and then he knew it was wrong, and then he got back into it so he could get elected. At one point in his life, Wallace didn't use race baiting. He really wasn't into that when he was a younger man. And then he got beaten real badly in a race. I don't remember what he was running for, governor or what, but he got beaten by a guy who was doing race baiting, and the Ku Klux Klan went out and stirred people up to vote against Wallace. So after that, he said, I won't use the word, but I'm never going to get out-end again, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And so after that point, he really started using the whole race issue to put himself in a position of prominence. And, of course, when he stood in the doorway at the University of Alabama and all that stuff. And then he became kind of the darling of the right, you know. And basically, you know, in a way, he was doing the same thing Ron Paul's doing right now, only Ron Paul's being, you know, a crypto, you know, racist.
A crypto who knows?
Yeah. You know, Ron Paul, you know, I just want to say something nasty. I swear, I see so many bumper stickers in this town where they'll have InfoWars on one side, on the right, on the left side, vote Ron Paul, you know. Mm-hmm. I'm so sick of it.
I hear you, man. And like you said before, I mean, and you're going to get back into it again, but people don't understand Ron Paul's roots, too. You know, it's funny how these candidates, do they not think that the past will catch up with them? And sometimes when it does, their supporters will not look the other way, as you well know.
Yeah.
Don't
right.
you take down my baby.
Yeah.
And they'll have
I've seen that. I've seen people, you know, they were talking about, some reporter was asking, well, don't you realize that Ron Paul has all these right-wing, you know, racist associations? You know, the thing that gets me about it is like that one article I read is he keeps talking about fascism, and then he goes and endorses, basically kind of cuddles up to Romney, and Romney is nothing more than big business merging with big government, which is fascism, you know? Like, where do you come up with this crap, you know?
I know.
But, you know, to get up there and spout off as if you're opposed to the thing that you really are, you know, which to me is the height of hypocrisy. I cannot believe people, you know, just get all fired up over Ron Paul. You know?
They're buying an image, not the reality, which is the whole situation in politics as we know it.
All he has to do is say a few things like, you know, well, we were wrong about the Iraq War. Well, no kidding. Everybody knows that anyway.
No argument here. All right, so that's our the thing I wanted to bring out about the assassination attempts. Both failed on Teddy back in the beginning of the 20th century, and also with Wallace in Laurel, Maryland, where I would live a few years later, and go to that same shopping plaza.
Well, if you look at Bremer, that's an amazing case. If you look at Bremer's background, Bremer had never held a job any better than, say, a busboy. He only held very low-paying menial jobs, and yet he was able to drive all over the country in a relatively nice car and stay at hotels and eat out all the time. Where did he get the money?
Exactly, and he also had one gun that shot 3 caliber bullets.
Yeah.
And a whole lot more from one revolver.
I think the gun held 9 shots, and were like 11 to 12, 13 shots.
Yeah, and 3 different caliber bullets casings were fired. Another magic gun that Sir Heinz Serhan would use later.
Whenever he got it together and got all that money, he bought a gun that nobody had ever seen.
A magic gun.
And people buy into this crap. Don't you know? It just goes in one ear and out the other. Yeah. Lee Harvey Oswald, all of his friends, all of his associates were people on the extreme right, and yet they're calling him a communist. Does that make any sense to anybody? You know, it's amazing.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you try, without a doubt. I mean, we're preaching to the choir here. There's no two ways about the fact that he was a useful idiot. He was whatever you want him to be. He was a super patriot.
Even the Warren Commission, they brought up the fact that he had been an FBI informant. He had an informant number. The FBI revealed that number in the Warren Commission, and people don't realize that. Not only that, but it was also brought out, although it's not formally in the commission, that he had a CIA connection, too. A lot of people think that actually Lee Harvey Oswald worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence. But he, at any rate, definitely had ties to intelligence. He was an intelligence operative. And it's almost a certainty that he was a false defector to the Soviet Union.
Yep, no problem with that.
I mean, it's just, and yet people just don't get it. But he was sheep dipped. They put him in, and that's what Garrison called it. They sheep dipped him. They made it look as if he was a communist so that he could be the perfect patsy. Well, look, he's a commie. You know, he killed the president because he hates American democracy. He's pro-communist, you know, pro-Castro.
No, he was the all-purpose fool.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about it. And did
Poor
you
bastard. He even said it. You can even see that the newsreel, the video, where he's talking to somebody on television there, and they're asking him, and he goes, "I'm just a patsy." Mm-hmm. You know, he realized at that point it became clear to him that he had been set up.
Well, people would say he's trying to save his ass, so he'll say everything. I think also what it was telling is when. I mean, if they had, no one seems to do any kind of voice analysis on this as they can now, but I think we've both seen on YouTube or wherever where he's confronted with the charge and he says, I've been charged with that. No one's told me that.
Yeah.
And then he says, I did not kill the president.
Said I didn't shoot anybody.
No. And I believe him.
I definitely believe it.
I don't think he popped. I don't think he popped. What's his face?
And there were so many people that helped in setting him up. Even this guy Wesley Frazier, who said he brought in that package, which was the rifle, etc. Frazier gave him a ride to work that day. Well, they started looking into Frazier's background, and it appears that Frazier was just lying through his teeth because he'd been threatened by the FBI. And they interviewed the guy who kind of was head of security at that place. And he said Oswald didn't bring a package in here. I never saw a package.
No.
You know. So it's like stuff like that. Oh, and what kind of a fool who's going to commit a murder with a weapon would go and buy it through a mail order house in Chicago and put an address, to a post office box that has his name on it. When anybody in those days, and I can tell you for a fact, anybody could walk into a store or sporting goods place in those days and buy a rifle.
And not be known.
Cash.
That's right.
No questions asked.
That's absolutely.
Nothing to fill out. No nothing. Because I lived in Texas, and that's how my dad bought my first rifle.
Yeah, you buy cash and nobody asks questions.
Yeah, I was with him. My dad bought it for me.
So why would he create a trail?
It was my Christmas present,
So why would he create a trail that would bring that to him?
Right.
Look, we're with the 2-hour mark, so I don't know if you want to finish up something before we call it a day. By all means. If not, we can, use whatever you wanted to jump off. It's your call.
Well, I don't want to go, be too wordy on this thing, but I would like to talk a little bit about when we're talking about Lee Harvey Oswald. Want to get into his best friend in Dallas, a man named George de Mohrenschildt, who turned out to have been a Nazi spy during World War II. When all was said and done, and had all kinds of Nazi